going.
Oh, who would be a Wolves fan, eh? Hello and welcome to today's episode of Wolves Fancast. Rich Hobbs here to talk about Wolves 1-1 draw versus Brighton. Joining me today, we've got Ed, we've got Matt, we've got Ali. Fellas, we're going to get a league win at some point, right?
In 2025, hopefully.
I mean, look, we're free and beaten. If we look at it through that prism, it's gone really well.
We are.
Has Matt frozen, or is he just staying on? We are.
I was going to say he held us in suspense at that point, didn't he? We are, and we'll find out. But I think it's a really tricky one at the moment. Before we get cracking into it, make sure to keep up to date with us on YouTube. If you're watching live, feel free to flood our comments with either your happy clapping or bedwetting opinions. And also afterwards as well, you can find us on all social medias. We'll start with team news and lineup, guys, because it feels like Pereira has kind of made his mind up about the defence and goalkeeper now, and it seems to be paying off. I mean, Ed, what was your kind of initial reaction to the lineup?
I thought Johnson being in goal made sense, and I think we saw through the game, and I will talk about it, that was the right decision. He actually kept the net, as the goalkeeper's supposed to do, and the back four makes sense, doesn't it? I think prior to the game, everyone, the group chat we mention on every podcast, and the people are sitting around me and the lower Billy Wright, we're chuffed that we were sticking with the back four, chuffed that we hadn't gone, oh God, it's Brighton. We know they have loads of new gens that no one's ever heard of that are always really, really good out of nowhere. And let's go back to a back five and give up any kind of attacking intent. And the back four makes sense. And Krejci and Santi Bueno was probably not what would have been on my bingo card at the start of the season as being our back two centre-backs on the back of what we had last year with Agbadu. But they are by far and away the best centre-backs in form and potentially on paper in the starting lineup. And I think the two full-back pick themselves without Doc.
Yeah. I was going to say, almost feeling quite happy about our defence at the moment. And obviously, I think, we'll go into the performance in a minute anyway, right? But it just felt a bit more balanced, I guess. It's just we need to kind of work out. Well, I think Gomez and Andre kind of pick themselves. It's just working out that forward line and more attacking players, I guess, Ali, to work out how we can, create more than a goal a game.
Yeah, I think that was, as Ed said, the back four seemed to almost not quite pick itself, but it was only really the only sort of question was whether he'd go to a five and bring Agbadu in. And then, so obviously, when you saw the back four, it was then the question, will Hwang keep his place after coming off at half time and not particularly play very well against Tottenham. So he was probably the surprise in the front of the 11 that he picked. I think he can consider himself quite fortunate to have kept his place. That seems to be the one position, as you say, that we're trying to sort of figure out at the top end of the pitch. Are we playing, if we're playing a 1-9, so it's Larson up front on his own, who's playing around? It seems that Arias has sort of cemented his position a bit. Manetzi seems like he's always going to play, so it's that one other position, and he clearly doesn't seem to fancy. Sort of Fer Lopez has had his one game and come out. Rodrigo Gomez sort of doesn't seem to be fancy playing at that high up the pitch. Bellegarde has had a few chances and never really taken it, and seems to be better in central midfield. And Tolu, he doesn't seem to think's fit, so he doesn't play two up front. So I don't know actually if Hwang is sort of the only option at the moment when you go through that. Actually, I didn't think today was one of his worst games, albeit it's a low bar, but I thought he actually was all right today. Didn't think he played too badly. But yeah, I think that was it. For me, that was the one sort of you were looking at. It's either Hwang's going to start and it'll be a back four, or will Agbadu start and then Hwang would come out, presumably.
I think Hwang's a really tricky one. For me, he works best when he's probably in the front two, or he's in a much nearer the goal, because ultimately he's not quite skillful enough to play as a winger. So he kind of needs to really sort of tuck inside, but it doesn't always allow him for that. I mean, Matt, we've had a couple of YouTube comments. Would you have picked Fer Lopez to start ahead of either Hwang or even Player of the Year contendee Manetzi?
It's it's a really difficult one, because when we're playing in that the back formation, you want or you need natural wingers, because you're not going to be having the width that you have from fullbacks opposed to wingbacks, and it's frustrating because I think Manetzi had one of his better games, or the low bar that is, and Hwang just isn't suited to play in that position, hugging the touchline and being that tricky winger that creates. Do we ever see him successfully run to the byline and then get it across the face of goal and get in front of his man? No. So I think that if Vita's insisting on playing in that system, he doesn't have the personnel for it. And I think Lopez would be a much better option in those scenarios to create something out of, an air of creativity about it, because I just don't think Hwang's that man at the moment. But I think the front line in general have a lot more to offer if this is going to be the system that Vitor's going to stick with going forward for me.
I mean, it still frustrates me that we're coming into a second international break 6 weeks into a season, or whatever it is, 8 weeks into a season, and we're now kind of settled on a back four. We don't know what the strongest Wolves team is, and seemingly that players aren't quite playing themselves to make an issue as well. And Hwang's been in this team for a number of years now. The club should know what type of player he is, but he's out there because, as Ali said, like the likes of Rodrigo Gomez just isn't fancied to play that bit more forward position. And if we're not playing with wing backs, where does someone like Gomez fit into this team? And skipping 60 minutes of the game, but there's an opportunity, I guess, to kind of stay on the front foot and bring on Gomez, and he didn't. And we kind of, but the tactics got a bit mixed up second half. Personally, it just feels that we've worked out the balance of the defensive unit now, and it seems to work better for not just the defense, but probably the midfielders in front of them as well, I'd argue. In terms of everyone kind of having the space that they need to. But yeah, the forward line, it just still feels so disjointed. But going into the game, I think the big kind of note I made was I don't ever recall Brighton being that physical aside. I found it genuinely kind of bemusing how happy they were to put the boot in, really.
It wasn't necessarily. Go on, sorry, Ali.
So I was just going to say, it was a surprise. I mean, that clearly that led to Vitor's frustration, but you had Belieber arguably could have been booked twice for the initial tug on Gomez and then the subsequent foul on Bueno. Obviously, Welbeck got booked, didn't he? Vifa, the defender, got booked at some point. Dunk got booked. It was a surprise how many bookings they were picking up, and you were sort of. I thought Belieber was a walking red card. You thought this is coming, but they were smart enough to bring him off. But yeah, as you said, I can't recall Brighton ever being that sort of poor. I really didn't think they played very well, and it was a surprise how much they seemed to be losing their heads. that they were really, they were giving away so many fouls, giving away so many bookings. I can't recall Brighton ever playing like that, and it's just because whenever they play Wolves, they always seem to walk all over us, and they look a much better side than we do.
I think a lot of that goes on the referee in this game today. I felt that both teams were getting very, very petty, very frustrated, and I think it was because of the stop-start nature of the game and how he was sort of managing it. There were some yellow cards for fouls that maybe could have not been yellow cards. There were yellow cards for fouls that definitely deserved it, but he was sort of pulling people from pillar to post, and there were some really strange decisions on either side. He didn't have a handle on the game today at all, and considering neither of these two teams are teams that you would imagine to be, I mean, obviously we know Joao and Andre are walking yellow cards, but everyone else is, we've been accused of being quite timid and letting sort of be petty rather than be physical in the past. But I think the referee has a lot have to question. I don't know what his marks will be from PGMOL for this game, but I felt he was all over the place. And we understand that Vitor booted the ball into the referee's dugout, which obviously you can't do. But we saw Enzo Maresca flying down the wing yesterday and getting a booking for it, and loads of other things. I just think that the whole game could have been managed an awful lot better, and it just wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say a couple of comments in terms of Vitor Pereira's sending off, because I think when you see it initially, you kind of don't see what he's been sent off for. In terms of him kind of booting the ball, and it's frustrating, right? Just because you lose your manager, and for me, it doesn't necessarily set the greatest of examples, right? But there's bigger things to get that bit worked up about for me. So I did find it a bit frustrating. And I know he's still able to communicate with the bench once he's sent off. Is that correct? I'm looking towards Matt as the gospel of all knowledge.
Hey, I'm no Stu Hall here. I don't read the books inside and out, but my sources, namely, I think it was Ed in the group chat earlier, tell me that they can, and I think there should be enough consistency between the coaching staff anyway. For me, that it doesn't. It should be a cohesive thing between all of the coaching staff to be able to relay the manager's message anyway. To be honest.
Yeah, and you could argue that the believer kind of could have got 2 yellows, I guess, and that kind of bit of frustration. And hey, if it was as Neil White sort of saying, the player who should have who fouled Gomes, which was Belieber, should have been red carded, and it just doesn't feel like we always get those lucky breaks. However, what we did get lucky on was about 20 seconds afterwards when we went ahead through what turned out to be an own goal, but could have been a absolute striker of a goal from Menetzied.
Yeah, probably his best game in a Wolves shirt. I am staunchly not a Menetzi fan in the slightest, but I think
is anyone actually a Menetzi fan when we save it? Just out of
Vitor,
curiosity.
I think Vitor definitely is. But no, well, in the role that he plays today, he doesn't. And this is going to sound like the worst backhanded compliment ever, but the role that he plays with the back four is he doesn't really touch the ball much, and therefore he's a really useful tool. But when he has to be in and around intricate passing in the midfield, he isn't. And he was a nuisance. He ran hard. He did a couple of good blocks and won us some fouls today. But it was a screamer of a hit. He absolutely everything kitchen sink into it, didn't he? And it's right in front of where I sit, and calling the own goal straight away. But it was a great save. Probably the second best save of the game, obviously after Johnson's. We'll talk about later. But we needed that bit of luck, I think, to get that goal. We've been talking about the front line and the fact that we're not really getting goals from anywhere. I'll take a backhanded goal off the back of the goalkeeper's hand any day.
I mean, I do think it was kind of deserved, at least throughout the first half, right? There's, it's easy. It's really easy to slag off Wolves at this point, right, Ali? But we did all right. Like, you could argue that Brighton weren't particularly great, but I thought we were doing well.
Yeah, I agree. I thought we started the game fine. It was not it was not for the purists. It felt like it was almost played a bit in slow motion. It was watching it on the telly. It looked like both teams were knackered immediately, and you could tell the wind. The telly didn't really tell you how bad the wind was. You could just see it as the game went on. That clearly the wind was quite a big factor because a lot of times players couldn't read where the ball was bouncing and things. But yeah, I thought first half we played quite well. We had a few half sort of chances. We got into some good positions. Hwang got away a couple of times down the left, put a couple of good balls in the box. It was better, and I don't think that being 1-up at half time was sort of unjust in any way. I don't think Brighton could have many complaints about that. We'd created the best chance, the goal that we scored. They didn't really create anything. They had a few pot shots, didn't they, from outside the box? I'm trying to think of anything else that they had. It felt actually like a game. They were more likely to score from pressing a mistake out of us than something happening where they were going to nick it and get in. But we did, actually we dealt with everything. We look so much more solid with Johnson there, and actually Krejci obviously makes a big difference having somebody who can play, and they can't. We haven't got a left centre back who the other team will just deliberately press, knowing that he isn't good enough on the ball. But no, I thought, I thought first half we looked solid. That, as you said, I think the most important thing about the back four is adding a player in midfield. And I almost feel like I want to do like an Alan Partridge. Can I shock you? I'm not. I actually don't mind Menezzi. I don't mind Menezzi in that role. In that role, it not say it works, but you can see the logic behind it. As Ed says, he's not there to do what Andre does in terms of getting the ball off the back four and spraying it around. He's there to try and get up with Larson and getting around him, and he's there to run and press, and he did that well today. And he was, that was, I think, by far his best game. He was throwing himself at things at the back. He was pressing up the front as well. He played one pass through to Hwang where I didn't realize it was him who played it. You were like, was that Menezzi played that? But that was actually quite a good through ball. And obviously, he scored that goal against Brentford last year on the last day. He scored that one today. And he has a good habit of being, the ball falling to him in the box. He does seem to have that habit, a bit like Hwang used to have, where he didn't play particularly well, but he would be in the box at the right time. So I think in that system, he actually works, and we looked good first half. That we looked good, and it was after the goal. Like I had the trepidation of what happened against Leeds. Are we just going to go back into our shell and sort of sit back? I don't think we did. I actually think we carried on. We kept playing, and so you sort of went into half time quite optimistic, saying, actually, I think we've probably edged this. And we didn't do what we did against Leeds, which was go into our shell and sit back. We actually sort of managed the game pretty well.
Yeah, I was genuinely impressed by Wolves. And as you alluded to, Ali, Bueno and Krejci, Ed, as a back two as your two centre halves, it just feels solid and balanced, and particularly Bueno. And I was a big fan of Bueno last season. It just seemed to have really kind of stepped up the last kind of week or two.
Yeah, there's an intent to them as well with their passing, and I've always felt like that with Santi, that he sort of that first touch, he gets it out of his feet, even if all he was doing sort of last season was wrapping the ball into Semedo or over to Aït-Nouri. There was some intent to it, and I think Ali touched on it there, but I think I'll say blatantly the fact that we didn't have Totti and his hooves this week on anywhere near the ball, just that just gives us both sides where we know we're going to be able to be much more press resistant. With Totti, I think I've mentioned several times already this season, some of the passes he hits out to the left wing back and they're bobbling everywhere, and it takes two touches to bring a Totti pass down, and for the player to to play the ball off with Krejci, you probably don't even need that. The first one sets you, and you're off on your way. It's night and day, really, the ability on the ball with both of them. And we saw when it was still 1-0, and we were sort of holding on a little bit. We'll talk about the substitutions when we sort of did eventually set back and wait. Krejci was, he was celebrating clearances, blocks. He seems like the kind of player that loves to defend as well, which is really what we need, because we're going to need those players for a fight this year, because we aren't where we probably should be.
And I guess the other player to talk about in terms of top tier performances is Sam Johnston, who again is someone who I think many wouldn't have been shocked if he got a move in the summer. I guess he fits into that probably too good to be a backup goalkeeper, not necessarily a super high enough quality to warrant a first team place, but he's again someone who's shown why the club bought him in the first place, and I mean that saved him the second half. But genuinely one of the best saves I think I've seen in a long time, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think when he headed it, I said goal. I was like, oh, goal. And then, and you were just like, how has that not gone in? How has he done that? And we've not been able to say that about one of our keepers for a while. He did it last week. I actually thought today's save might even have been better, just because of because he was going the wrong way. The one, you feel like the one last week, it was almost, it just hit him and hit the bar, ricocheted onto the bar. He was going the wrong way and managed to get himself back. It was a fantastic save. He seems to have a slight issue when he slides out. He seemed to spill it a couple of times for reasons that were completely unclear, because he was on the ground and could just grab it. But those two things aside, which were pretty minor and didn't lead to anything, he just looks solid. And it is nice to have a goalie when there's a shot on target. He is actually saving it. But with his feet, even, we a couple of times we play out short, but you can see when it isn't on, he's prepared to go long. A couple of times he went too long, but I think that was probably the wind. But yeah, he just looks solid, and his communication looked better, seemed a bit more commanding. A couple of times he came out, he either came out and grabbed it, or he came out and ushered it out of play. It just looked more confident. In the back four looked more confident with him there. I think it's huge, and I feel like Sarr used to do it more and has stopped doing it, where coming out for crosses and just having that, starting on the 6-yard box and staying there and not retreating back. Actually staying there and being confident enough to go, no, I'm going to grab this, or I'm going to punch it, or just it's a massive thing for a defender to know your keeper's going to do that, and is prepared to come and take some of the pressure off. But those two saves he's made in the last two games, he hasn't put a foot wrong, has he? Since he's in the Newcastle game last week against Spurs, and today he hasn't put a foot wrong. So there's, I wouldn't have been shocked at all in the summer if he went. I thought that was massively on the cards, but it's his shirt to lose now, I would have thought. You can't knock him. I think he couldn't do anything. He couldn't do anything for the goal, really. That wasn't on him. But everything else he's dealt with fine. You don't want to be talking about your goalkeeper, do you? That's the mark of a good keeper. We don't want to be talking about him. We just want to say he saves what he should. But yeah, he's actually, in the last few weeks, they are sort of certain goals that he's actually saved.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the stats, Ed, around sort of Jose Sarr this season, and I can't remember what point this stat came out, but he was like statistically the worst goalkeeper in the league in terms of his expected goals or whatever it was. That ultimately he was kind of going under the radar as someone who ultimately, sounds really rudimental, wasn't making saves. And I know it's like the bare minimum you should expect from a goalkeeper, right? To stop shots. It's kind of like basics on the job. But I'd be interested in your thoughts. Is Johnson giving the defenders the confidence, or the defenders giving Johnson the confidence? I mean,
the right answer is it's a bit from column A, a bit from column B. But I think Johnson definitely, the communication, like first time I've heard a goalkeeper this season talking to the back four. He didn't stop. He did not stop talking throughout the whole game, even when the the action was down the other end, he was jogging out to the edge of his area and talking to Krejci and Santi. And there was a couple of times he was asking Santi in particular to go a bit wider to receive one of the short balls. He, of course, obviously lost his mind to Chua for the goal that we'll touch on. But I think it really does help. I think, just to touch on your point, it does help that he hasn't been sort of dealing with the kind of stuff that Sarr had to deal with people running in on goal from our mistakes, which I think probably doesn't show up in the stats sometimes. I'm not a Sarr apologist. I think it is Johnston's shirt to lose, and he impressed me today. But I think he gives confidence to that back four, and a couple of saves like he's pulled off, like Ali talked about there, just means that's the sort of shot in the arm he needs to continue to be that confident and to carry on playing the way he's playing. If one goes in off the back of his hand, who knows where sort of his confidence might go, because we all thought he was gone in the summer. I think it's a perfect storm now probably for Jose Sarr to sort of leave, hopefully in January, for some decent money to the Saudi move that's been mooted for the last 18 months or so. And thanks for all your time. But without Sarr Sarr was brought in as a shot stopper, and when you're not doing that, his kicking is suspect, his temperament's been suspect. He just isn't the right pick for this team, especially not with the back four, because he's going to have to deal with more shots.
We've had a great question on YouTube, which I'd love to say happens. It does happen quite a lot, to be fair. But what do you reckon Sarr's legacy will be in a Wolves shirt? Because as we've kind of alluded to, he's been linked with a move away for, let's say, best part of 2 years now. Definitely last 18 months, right? But it's hard to see him finding his place back in the team. It does feel like he's the next player to ultimately get moved on. I think it's interesting, Ali, you kind of touched on something that part of his game and what made him stand out as a goalie was he was really different to Rui Patricio, who was like your 6-yard keeper. He just wouldn't enter anything, whereas Sarr kind of came in and was that bit more explosive in terms of kind of coming out for stuff. And it just seems like over the last couple of years, just that side of his game's just quietly gone down.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to have, the last 2 seasons, he's had a terrible start to the season. I mean, last season made more sense because obviously he was on the verge of a move. It fell through. We signed another goalie in his place, so he kind of had an excuse last season of why he started the season badly. This year just seems, I don't know what it is, where he's, as you say, his key attribute was he was a great shot stopper and would pull off the odds. He would pull off saves like against Everton away, and the games that a bit like Johnson has, saves that you wouldn't have expected him to make. And so you could forgive some of the other stuff. You could forgive, the fact that he's terrible with his feet and had the odd error in him, or would give away penalties, rushing out. I don't know what it is, but it just feels now that he isn't making the saves that he was, and he's lost that. He doesn't come out. He doesn't appear to me to be coming out. He hesitates when he's wanting to come out for stuff, which is sort of why some of the goals sort of loop over him, because he's come out and then retreated back. And he's not. I don't know if it's sort of like anticipation. Some of the goals against Leeds and City sort of felt like, yeah, they've gone in the corner, but should you have almost you knew they were going to go in the back corner. That's where they're going. So better goalkeepers have already started to make that move to cover that off. And it just felt like, whether he's flat-footed, I don't know. It just everything that was hit seemed to go in, and that's not a good sign. And I think Ed's right. He's not been, he hasn't been helped. He was playing, that was as bad as we were. There were, we were giving away a lot of chances that were good chances to score. So that wasn't helping him. And just the fact that the defense was changing every week, we didn't know who we were playing, also doesn't help him. But I think it probably is the beginning of the end for Sarr. I can't see how he forces his way back in, unless Johnson falls off a cliff, obviously. It feels hard for him to come back in, and it would make sense that in January, if we can find a club for him, and let him go, and I say it's Johnson's shirt then, with Bentley as backup.
Ed, how about you? How do you kind of sum up his time at Wolves?
I think it's summed up by the man himself, isn't it? We remember, like, when Ali said the save against Everton, that was the first thing I thought of. His first season in particular, he was so different to Patricio, and he was that shot stopper. But he has that feel of a player that's maybe got too comfortable, didn't really step up to the fact that Johnston came in to challenge him, and he didn't react very well at all, as we saw under Gary O'Neill at the start of last season. So it kind of feels like it's gone a bit stale for him. And goalkeepers, that we don't like to talk about them. I think Ali said it earlier that, what we want from them is what you want from a referee, isn't it? Just that they're there, they'll do their job. We thank them for it, but that's not why no one really comes to watch the keepers. And the fact that he has become a sort of a lightning rod with some of the fans as well. I guess that's another thing that we could probably will be in his legacy, is kicking off with fans and losing his temper and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a shame, because he was part of that, that side that that we were trying to push for higher up the league, and he came in and sort of carried on the Patricio mantle of sort of having we'd kind of gone back to having good goalkeepers like we always did when I was growing up, and now it seems to be it's a bit sullied. So if he leaves in January, it probably is the culmination of someone sort of coming out the back door, really, and just thanks for your time. It'll be a Twitter post where we say thank you and leave it there. But his legacy should be mainly positive, but I think it sums him up as a player. I think that he can be a 10 out of a 10 and a 2 out of 10 in the same game, and I don't think you can have that as a goalkeeper.
Yeah, I think it's always sort of strange to see a player's decline in I was going to say like real time, but it's just felt like he's never quite been able to live up to that fantastic first season in a Wolves shirt. But looping back to Johnson, the only other thing I was going to sort of mention in terms of his performance and some of the stuff that Ed, you alluded to in terms of he seems to be a lot more vocal, a lot more organising, and I think it potentially helps him in a way that Krejci feels like he's a leader, but he is relatively new, particularly into his team, into his league, his country. But I think actually, without Toti Gomez, who is captain by armband, without Agbadu, who's again someone who is a leader, actually we're kind of a bit void, and it's nice to actually see players stepping up rather than it feeling like we weren't without a captain of the back. Actually, it felt like Johnson, Bueno, and Krejci all kind of stepped up in that sort of way and actually made sure that they're organised, rather than what I feel like with a back five, because you've got the numerical advantage, that they can't go, well, we don't need to be organised because we've got stronger numbers consistently, and we've just not quite been there. Saying that, Wolves there's a kind of real sliding doors moment in this game, which is when Wolves did bring on Agbadu, and I wouldn't say Wolves were, super on top, but I think it showed what kind of manager Pereira is in terms of deciding that actually, what we needed to do was go from 4 at the back to 5 at the back, considering we were winning. But it was just frustrating to kind of see that, not quite throwing in the towel, but it was very much like on FIFA or EA, where you kind of go from balance to, we're just going to go ultra defensive now. And it did just go, it felt like we were just going to invite that extra bit of pressure on.
Yeah, and we're playing a team like Brighton, right, who thrive on being beat at Man City, right? That they like the ball at feet. All we did was we made Larson back to where he was sort of the start of last season, when the strand was for stranded. He was all on his own, bless him, up on the top, and it made no sense to go to the back five. It sort of sucked, and we weren't under any pressure. There was nothing. Brighton were not at the races today at all. They weren't interested really in the game. I think I mentioned earlier, I think the ref sort of added to that with some interesting decisions for both sides. They weren't ready. Hertzler was all over the place in his own technical area, screaming at them. And the back four, they were holding with the keeper, were holding each other accountable. You know, it wasn't just well done for clearing the ball. It was, you could have done this, you could have done that. There was a lot more talking involved. And bringing on Agbadou last year was he was the, you know, the next prime Virgil van Dijk or Yapstam, or insert your dominant centre half here. And now we sort of bringing on this bloke who's becoming a bit of a pantomime villain into a back five. And all we did was secede any chance of getting the ball back up the other end of the field. All it felt like we were doing was ready to settle in for 40 minutes worth of inviting pressure on. And like I said, I think Brighton are one of the best teams in the league at popping the ball around, and that's what happened. You know, some of our chances at the end of the game were on the break out of nowhere, but all we did was invite the pressure on. It was a strange decision.
Yeah, I've really struggled with it. I do find it frustrating with managers when, like, it's 1-0, there's still a lot to kind of play for, and it didn't feel like we were getting so exposed at the back that there was a need to try and just flood it in. Or if you want to do that, do it with 10 minutes to go. Just like give you a bit of extra time. Don't get me wrong, we still had a couple of chances, right? You know, Arias had one which he hit over the bar. I think that was just before the substitution, and I think the Larson hitting the post was afterwards, if I've got my timing right. But so, you know, we were still kind of doing stuff, but it did just give us that. As Gav says in the comments, subs cost us, and that's on Vitor Luis, and yeah, and I guess the other sub, and I don't know if this one's kind of, you know, Strand Larsen seemed to be annoyed that he was pissed off because he wasn't being replaced by a striker. And then you end up in a point where, you know, we're playing for however long, you know, just without a forward, basically, when he, you know, he takes off, you know, what he bring on Bellegarde effectively for him.
Yeah. I mean, just going back to Agbadou, I can only think he sort of had the idea that against Spurs last week that it worked, and that he brought Agbadou on at half time, and we actually looked more in control with the extra centre back on, and we didn't sort of look like we were conceding as much territory. But today, as Ed said, by once we took Hwang off at a time in the game where we were already sort of being penned a bit back in and we were struggling to keep the ball up top, by taking Hwang off, it then just made it impossible for us to keep the ball up top, and it was sort of like, we've just made it. The one thing we're struggling with here is actually getting out and getting up the pitch, and Larson struggling to hold it. Not necessarily because it's bad holder play. He just can't. The ball's just being fired away from him, or he's outnumbered. And you felt like taking off Hwang and putting another centre half on was really sort of, that feels very negative and feels like it's going to be really hard for us now to get up the pitch. The only, you know, the Arias chance came from a breakaway, but we had Hwang. Hwang was up there and laid it into Bueno, didn't he? And it sort of, we needed those extra numbers. I think actually, to me though, as you've said, the stranger substitution was then bringing off Larson and putting a midfield and putting Bellegarde on, which was that was sort of what's going on there. Because actually, at that point in the game, it was sort of Larson had he's hit the post, but really from watching on the telly, I thought he looked like he was flagging a bit, and that he had the chance, he hit the post, and you thought, okay, fair enough, that's kind of it. But this will be Tolu coming on, and it feels like a nice Tolu game. It feels like 15 minutes, another big guy up front. He's going to be a nuisance. He'll win some free kicks. He'll, you know, that made more sense. So when Bellegarde came on, it was sort of, what are we doing now? Because again, we're struggling to keep the ball. We are unable to get up the pitch because we can't hold the ball up. And he's now bringing off on number 9 and bringing a midfielder on. That to me was the really sort of confusing one. And I thought, well, so presumably he's moving Menezzi up there, and Arias looked like at that point he'd kind of, after the miss, I think it was kind of, his game was kind of done. Once he missed that chance, he looked, I mean, again, he looked knackered. That was to me the strangest of the substitutions. Bringing off a striker and putting another midfielder on was a really strange. Bellegarde didn't really do anything. But again, it wasn't really sure what position he was actually playing. It was
Yeah.
and it was just bizarre. That was really strange.
Yeah, because we effectively ended the game playing a 5-5 formation-wise.
Yep.
And, you know, am I Hwang's biggest fan? Not really, but he is a forward, right? It might be like not your best one, but he at least will positionally play on the defenders. Whereas bringing on Bellegarde, he is not going to be able to do that job. And you know, even with bring on Tolu, because you say, if nothing else, you've got someone who he's got 15 minutes in him, just to give him a bit of nuisance value. And if you're worried about set pieces, which we ironically should have been, you'd have still had an extra player who could have come back in that last sort of 10 minutes or so, who's still an aerial threat defensively as well. I just didn't get it that we kind of just decided to fully retreat, not once, but basically twice.
Yeah, and I think, sorry to jump in, I think a lot of that, we know that JSL is coming back from his Achilles injury. We know he's not 100%. We know Manetzi puts in 100% every week. He was dead on his feet after about 75 minutes when he made that block at the end of the at the edge of the area, and he faked it being a head injury. That was mostly because he was gasping for air. But all of that is what, 10-15% extra because we had seceded the ball. So all we did for the 20 odd minutes in that half when Agbadou came on is just chase our tails, and that instantly just means that they're all blowing at that point. And the fact that we were leaving Larson on his own up front, he's chasing lost causes in the wind. We all those decisions were made by Vitor or Luis, the assistant manager, were just culminating in the fact that we were knackering our own players out. We were leaving important players stranded. We weren't picking up on the fact that, I think, as Ali said there, that that Arias' head had gone a little bit, and he was also blowing because he was doing a lot of chasing around as well. I just felt like we were our own worst enemy again. But rather than it being sort of a mistake this week, I think we can honestly say this week this is on the coaching staff and their decisions.
Yeah, I remember, was it? I can't remember which game it was now. I think I put a Twitter poll. Who's most accountable at the moment for Wolves kind of equipment? It was like the players, the coaching staff, the club, us, and it did feel like I don't think the players did an awful lot wrong today. Apart from I guess apart from the Brighton goal, which we seemingly managed to not talk about, and whatever was going on there. Like, that was frustrating. But apart from that, it didn't feel, it wasn't like we were giving the ball away on our own 18-yard box and passing it straight to them again, which is a baby step, but it is still like that bit better. But yeah, let's talk Brighton's goal, because why the hell not, Ed? It would have been down your. I was going to say your.
Yep.
Was it your side of the Billy Wright? Yeah.
And I was on my feet screaming, "Don't touch it to Chachua," and he didn't listen to me. So he has to take some of the blame there, because he just didn't listen to me when I told him not to touch it. There was no one really behind him. But it's safety first, and again, I think that again comes from, we made that decision when Agbadou came on. That just tells the players, shit me, all we're doing now is holding on. And that's the impression that they all had at that point. And just to be clear, Johnson definitely also told Tachua, it wasn't just me, that told him to not touch the ball, but he obviously didn't trust the wind. I don't know. And yeah, then no one switched on. Absolutely no one switched on to pick up that bloke who I think, watching back, shoulders it in as well. It's not even a great header. I think it's off someone's shoulder. It's in between two of their players. But I think, as Maximus Rice has put in the comments, I think everyone around me has said this has been coming since 60 minutes. And it was. I'm just quite glad it came as late as it did, because I think it just didn't give them enough time to get their wind in their sails to make it 2 and give us the double whammy of not even getting the point.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, Ali, I was going to say the actual header itself. I mean, he does it's a quick corner, late run, but it is kind of unmarked. I think organisationally, it's not super, is it?
No, we were just flat, weren't we? We hadn't set up, and they were all running onto it, and they all had the run on us, and it looked better in real time as a goal, and then you saw the replay, and him and the number 9 had both gone for it, and had kind of got in each other's way, and I said it came off somewhere between his head and his shoulder, and just our luck, it went in the, it was that Johnson couldn't do anything about that. You can't. I felt once that when Arias missed, that was when I felt like, oh, they're gonna, we will pay for that. It's the Premier League. That is the type of miss that you will pay for. And had he scored that, then I'm probably got less issue with bringing Agba on because they weren't threatening. Yeah. But as Ed said, Brighton were not good today, so it didn't feel like we needed to be that worried or that conservative about it. And they didn't create anything. They weren't creating anything. I mean, and the goals come from a set piece where, again, it was Chachua should have left it. He was on the line when he touched it. Like, he was literally stood on the line. It was quite a strange decision. Johnson immediately called him to go to the short corner. If you watch it back, Johnson straight away yelled, "You need to get out." He couldn't get out quick enough, but we'd half set up to defend the corner, but they were all just completely flat. They were all in a line, but they were just completely flat-footed, and the guy got the run on them. But as you said, it felt like it's when you're only 1-0 up and you're playing a team like Brighton who are good at keeping the ball and have a good scoring record. You are really to go half an hour. I think was it Goodman on the commentary? He's the commentator said it and said, you're not going to be able to go this long defending. You can't go that long. Maybe after 70, 80 minutes, you might try, but for a good half an hour to expect to try and keep a team out without sort of offering anything going forward and just letting them come wave after wave, it can happen where it's not a particularly pretty goal and there's some luck involved, but that can happen. It feels worse than last week because last week, even though it was a later goal, and it just felt. This one felt more self-inflicted and less sort of, well, that was a nice finish from Paulinho. It was a good goal. It was difficult to prevent. This one felt that game was there. They were not good today, Brighton. We should have beaten them. And that goal was preventable. And we didn't need to give them that much of the ball. And then the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes after that were just bizarre because we had 6 centre-halves on the pitch. Weren't sure where any of them were actually playing, and it was just bedlam. The last 5-10 minutes, it was really strange. And as you said, you've got players like Fer Lopez and Gomez on the bench who I feel like that's where the Hwang substitution that's where you felt as though if you're trying to keep the ball or hit somebody on the break, a Lopez or a Gomez seem to make more sense than bringing a centre back on in circumstances where we're not having to defend. We're not giving up lots of chances. We look fairly comfortable. If you'd have asked me at the start of the game, would we have taken a point? I probably would have done. And the same in the Spurs game. But when you're in the position we've put ourselves in, we don't really have the luxury to sort of give up points like we have done in the last 2, which I think is the frustrating thing.
Yeah. And you're right. It's so frustrating because it would have been so it's so avoidable, and Brighton get there. Look, it's a well rehearsed set piece in terms of a quick delivery, great crossing, and the timed run. But you've got 2 players who nearly bang into each other. He doesn't make it. It looks great in real time, and then you realise he's kind of just bundled it in. And there was still time on the clock. We say Spurs one was like basically the last kick of the game, and Wolves played with a hell of a lot of heart against Spurs, but you can't deny that Spurs also had chances and looked good for decent portions of that game as well. Whereas it wasn't like that in this game, and then you end up with a situation where you've still got basically 10 minutes to play with added time, I think, but you can't attack because half your team's in defensive mode. Like you don't have the personnel available to you to be able to get the territory up the pitch.
Well, more than half the team was centre backs, weren't they, at that point?
Yeah, it's like what do you fucking do about what do you do at that point? You can't, and you've got an opposition who's then got the momentum, and the sheer lack of game management is frustrating, because it's avoidable through better coaching, better management, better in-game tactics, and I don't know. I've whether I don't know how much pressure Pereira's actually under, and I don't know how much of the results have been fully him to blame. I know there's been a few comments, but this one felt like it wasn't on the players as much as it has been. And as Gav said, if Plan A is to defend the lead, that can never be it. That just won't work in the Premier League.
No, I think it's also Plan B and C. I think today that was the other thing, wasn't it? And just really quickly, Rich, sorry to jump in. I know we've seen some comments about Rodrigo Gomez and Fer Lopez. What I can say is from them warming up vigorously in front of me and the rest of the lowest really right today, is when the last change is happened and they realised they weren't coming on. Both of them did a very obvious roll of their eyes, throwing their hands up in the air a little bit, and then walked nonchalantly back to the bench because they knew all the subs had happened. So there's a slight worry. Again, I'm not a body language expert, but there's a potential here for another manager potentially losing some of the players with constantly not playing them, not picking them. And I think, as Ali touched on earlier, that the subs didn't make any sense. And Rodrigo Gomez in particular, who we've seen score this season, not coming on for Hwang. I worry about some of our younger players that have been brought here, sold the dream, and they don't even get a chance to play in their positions. I'm a bit worried about sort of how managing their young careers could come from this as well. I'm definitely not Vitor out. I don't think we're anywhere near that particular stage right now, but there's game management and there's also squad management here as well. And I think some of the decisions today made me worry about some of the mental states of these players that are on the fringes of the squad, on the fringes of their, careers. And are they going to want to sit on the bench in Wolverhampton in the swirling wind? Probably not.
Well, I was going to say, I really agree with you on it, and particularly when you make signings, and again, it goes back to that accountability thing. For if the players who you're spending a lot of money on aren't getting in the team ahead of Hwang Hee-chan.
Well, we know why Hwang plays, because we've got that Kouacha sponsorship. That's why he plays. I will never be convinced otherwise. If he's, and I've said it before, if he's not an only child like I am, I know one when I see one. He doesn't pass the ball when the ball gets to him. He's a black hole when he gets the ball. There were 3 or 4 chances of playing the overlapping in the first half when we were 1-0 up, and he just didn't do it. It's my ball, I'm going home player, and I can't stand him. So I've had my say on Hwang now.
I'm genuinely going to be on ChatGPT when Ali's talking next to find out if I can see if he's got any siblings. But my point is, and I think it's similar to Matt Doherty in that sense, that we are trying to invest in this team, but ultimately they're either not getting the chances or they're not impressing enough to really push through. So it's been really nice to see Arias play the last couple of games, and it feels like he might not be able to replace Cunha in terms of his goals and assists as yet, but actually he is showing enough to go, oh, hang on, this isn't hopefully a complete misfire. Like Krejci coming in as well, great. We can see how play Fer Lopez. Or it's unlike Rodrigo Gomez. Actually, if we don't have a position for him, if we're not playing wing backs anymore, cool. Then has he got a position? Can he play left? Left wing or whatever you kind of want to define it as. Because otherwise there'll be a team who'll pick him up because he's shown he's kind of good enough at this level, and there'll be a team who will kind of take a gamble on him. So I guess time will tell. I guess wrapping up, fellas, is when do we think Wolves will properly turn this around? Because it feels like we've kind of, stemmed the bleeding. It's not completely all doom and gloom, but we have ultimately still only got. Again, it depends on how you look at it. We've got 2 points from 7 games, but we're effectively a win away from being out of the relegation zone. It's not great, but it feels like it could still be somehow worse. International break coming up. Do we feel that we're going to have a bit more of a winning Wolves side when we come back on the 18th of October against Sunderland away?
I think that is a tough game because Sunderland have started so well. I think that's the best way to describe it. You have, as you did, Rich, there. We feel like we've stemmed the bleeding, that we are, we've not lost in 3. Okay, we've, the last 2 games we feel like we should have won. If you take the positives out of it, after the Leeds game, if you'd have said the next 3, you'll get a point at Spurs and you'll get a point at home to Brighton, you probably would have taken it, because you'd have said against Leeds, it looked completely, that performance. If we did that again against Spurs and Brighton, then we'd have got absolutely battered. We have improved. It looks like we've stemmed the flow. It's just getting that final bit over the line and actually seeing a game out. I mean, again, if Arias scores the goal today, I think we win that game. And he should have scored. And Larson possibly should have scored as well. I mean, I think his was a more difficult chance, but we score that goal, I think we win that game, and we should have won it. So if we take the positives, then we've had a good away point, a decent enough performance at home. As you say, Rich, I don't necessarily blame the players today. I think whether it's to say they've been let down, but they didn't have the way the team was set up. They couldn't get out. They had nowhere to go with it. So they were giving it away, but there wasn't really anywhere for them to go. They had no out. They had no option because he brought them off. The next 2, Sunderland away, I think is a tough game. I think at the moment it's important for us not to get beat, to try and build that little bit of, keep that little bit of confidence and say, we're now not getting turned over every week. We are looking more like a Premier League side. If I was putting money on it, I'm more hopeful that we would beat Burnley at home. I think that feels like absolutely must win. Sunderland away, I might get hammered for this, but I think if you gave me a point at Sunderland away and then a win at home to Burnley, I'd probably take it. That's 4. And as you say, as bad as we've been, we're not adrift. We're 2 points. Was it 2-3 points from safety? So we're by no means adrift, and despite how bad we've been, I think it's more just that the season does feel like it starts now. It doesn't feel like there's going to be 3 teams who get stranded this year. It feels like it's going to be a lot closer. So we are going to have to stop dropping points like this when we're in a winning position. So I feel like after the international break, I think Sunderland is a tough game. They've had a good run. They lost to United yesterday. But that isn't going to knock their confidence. That's not the games they're going to be focusing on winning. Tough place to go. But you'd like to think if we can put in a performance like today that we should be getting something there. And then Burnley at home feels like a huge game. And if we win that, I suspect if we get 4 points out of the next 2, then we're probably still in around the bottom 3, but we're in it. And it feels like the season has started. It's just it feels like we're always going to be this way. We're starting slow and just hoping that the season is long enough that we have time to pull it back. This year feels like the bigger gamble, because it doesn't look like there are 3 teams that are all that bad.
Yeah. I mean, Ed, as Andy said, Sunderland, Burnley, Fulham is our next 3 games, and Lord knows Vitor Pereira does love a bit of a streak of results. There is a make the clip, fellas, but there's a genuine chance we could be looking at 5 games and beating in the league, going into early November, which is a bit mad. But I don't know. Madder things have happened in football.
Yeah, and these are the games that we have to focus on, and we've got this international break now. Vitor can go and sort of lick his wounds from losing his temper today and get back to the drawing board and get some of those players back on board and keep drilling these tactics into them. And who knows, all three of those on paper, they're every single one of them's winnable, right? Yeah, Fulham, and they've huffed and puffed a bit this year. There's an awful lot of pressure on their young lad to score goals, and Jimenez is injured, and Munoz is not the player he was last year at the minute. Cue him scoring against us in a few weeks' time. Sunderland, we saw them lose to Man United. Who knows? They've got a lot of unknown quantities that are doing well at the minute, but we've been a promoted team that have come in and hit the ground running and fallen by the wayside. We've seen it many times over the years in the Premier League. So the chances are there. The Burnley game at home should be a winner, and it's probably not the right time to bring it up now. We've done an hour, but we've also got as a club a couple of weeks to sort out the effing music at the start of the game, because people were doing waltzes in the Billy Wright lower today, taking the mickey out of their own team's song coming out. That also, if anyone has any links to anyone at the Wolves, it has to stop. It has to stop. It's embarrassing. It's pathetic. I don't care what you bring in, but it can't be panpipes and it can't be Spanish guitar with a lady warbling. It just can't be, unfortunately.
I don't know a better point to end the show, to be honest, Ed, on that. I was going to say, Ed, stop. Get your soapbox, get down Molyneux. That's all I'm going to say. That is it for Wolves Fancast. We will be back, I guess. It's going to be mad when I say this, in mid-October, to preview Sunderland away. Make sure you keep up to date with all things Wolves on social media. That's X, that's Facebook, that's Instagram. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, on podcasts, wherever you get them as well. Until next time, it's goodbye from Ali.
Cheerio.
It's goodbye from Ed.
See you later.
And it's goodbye from me. See you next time, everyone.
Who would be a Wolves fan, eh?